Clear for you? All right, so I'll try to be brief. I like presentations that go straight to the point. On top of that, this time it's easy because the paper was written before the presentation due to the delay of the Congress. So if you're interested in the topic later on, you can read it in English or in French. Actually, a colleague of mine in Japan has a nice little journal in French for whoever among you speak French might be interesting for linguists and so on. So this is a bit of a strange, I would say, topic, which is not exactly what I'm usually teaching about, but this is something very personal, which is why I insisted that we are 4 co-authors, because it is literally a collective work, which happens to be quite common actually in linguistics. A lot of people actually are first of all observing their own family to come to all kind of conclusions. So this is exactly what we've done. The origin of this topic came actually little by little while talking with my children, who were regularly having all kind of difficulties, tantrums, and feeling very frustrated about the difficulties of expressing themselves in all kind of languages. And I told them, I said, well, don't worry, all the difficulties you're going through now will come to something useful later on. And so the genesis is really coming from some real life issues. The hypothesis then, when we started to look carefully at the questions of speaking several languages, we came across literally a mountain of articles and resources about bilingualism. Everything has been published in bilingualism, and it's very interesting. But already many less resources are available for 3 languages, and for 4 languages, we've got almost nothing. So the idea here was to say, all right, everything we read for bilingualism, can it be applied for 4 languages? Is it approximately the same thing, or can we notice any noticeable differences? So the methodology is a very common one for this type of topic, some participant observation, where we observed, made some interviews, there's some sort of regular studying discussions where we review all those questions. A study log that was actually kept by the children themselves to keep in mind all the difficulties, and also some interviews that were made at regular periodicity. Why recording the difficulties? Because precisely there are a lot of already literature about the benefits of speaking several languages, and I'm sure you're all more than aware of them. But when talking with adults who actually grew up learning simultaneously several languages, very often I found some differences between the general view of multilingualism and the experience people see. And so this research was made mostly to talk about the inconveniences, because the benefits, let's face it, are being covered in many other work. So here, some context. We are a family. I am French. My wife is Russian. We speak our language of origin all the time. I speak French, she speaks Russian. Okay, that's pretty standard. But we live in the Czech Republic, which is a 3rd language. So all the, I would say, schooling and all the social life is made in Czech. And we speak English at home between us. It's our, I would say, home language, and also almost exclusively our professional language. So the children actually end up learning simultaneously 3 native languages plus English, which is passive in learning as a language. So this is the context of the studies. So we actually managed to isolate several types of difficulties, and probably the most obvious is a delay, a slow apprenticeship of speech. It's known among multilingual children. Usually they actually learn to speak and actually present ideas in a structured manner later than monolingual. In our case, we could see even a delay compared with bilingual children. Simply put, before 3 years old, the children they knew some words, but they could not really make any sentences. And I would say till the age of, I would say, 8, 9, many of the languages were actually in a poor level of vocabulary, which is the second point. Obviously, here we're having a bigger amount of words to learn, and each language receives a lesser amount, and so this proved extremely frustrating for the children to actually explain things and actually just express their ideas. So that's the first and main actually difficulties that we came up. But there are other actually consequences. The lack of vocabulary created some issues in academic development, obviously linguistic ones. So here we're talking about being able to understand terms in mathematics, in chemistry, in any other field that are not just linguistics, and in linguistics itself, because of course learning English from scratch at school is different from learning English the way you get it naturally hearing around. And then also, very important, cultural ones. I'll come to that a little bit later again, because of course, education is very cultural, especially humanities, but we'll see also things more like hard science end up being very cultural in the education. So this actually created some issues. One example, everybody knows the Pythagorean theorem. We've all learned it at school. That's where precisely the trick starts, because those belongs to vocabulary that we learn at a certain time of our development. And it's one thing to get a teacher explain you in one language, and then one parent tries to explain, to help, but in a different language with different vocabulary. The third person comes, the second parent comes and tries to explain. We all understand what we're talking about, but we don't understand each other because we lack this education vocabulary, and the same when we try to understand each other in English. So this was felt as a real handicap by the children who felt that it was just not fair, because when they've got difficulties, they receive lots of help, but the help is actually not helping, if you see what I'm talking about. So that was the next ones. And then we've got the accentuated consequences, psychological ones, is particularly low self-confidence, which we found very common among bilingual children compared to monolingual, but in our case, created a bit of issues with the older one, for instance, and also difficulties of being perceived as mature due to precisely the lack of vocabulary, which is in our case accentuated by the reduction of vocabulary in all the languages. Then we've got, of course, this feeling of never speaking a truly native language, which creates issues not only at school, but also, for instance, on a more familial background, with typically the grandchildren or the friends of the friends praising the children for speaking so well a language, to which, of course, the individual in case will say, well, of course I speak well, this is my mother tongue. So somebody's praising you for speaking correctly your mother tongue is not a praise anymore. It ends up being actually a feeling of being different. So those are the main issues we've isolated over the time for the psychological and cognitive consequences. We've got, and I told you earlier, some issues actually that are more cultural, and we didn't want to focus too much on the topic in now because of the age of the children. This will probably be the topic of a second and separate paper, or the cultural aspect. But here, culture actually is mixed up with the education, because although we're talking of cultures that are not very far away, we're not talking about big cultural gaps, nevertheless, the historical, political gap is wide enough to create some grave difficulties at school, at home, with others. Or here we came up with a few live examples that actually created some interesting issues. The Napoleonic conquest, you understand that from a French perspective, it's very different from the Russian perspective, with the Czech in the middle having the another perspective. The Munich Agreement, so before the Second World War, the Second World War in general, which of course is such a hot topic in many of those countries, okay? Or closer to us, the Prague Spring in '68, which of course is viewed from quite various and different perspectives, whether French, Czech, or Russian. So this also proved to be immediately more a liability than a benefit. Of course, a lot of people from outside will say, oh, but look, it's so interesting, you've got so many perspectives and so on. But for the children, it's actually a liability, because they never actually feel certain about the way they should recall those issues, for instance, right? Then we've got limits that are more on the communication level or social level. First of all, the lack of basic cultural cues. So in literature, movies, cartoons, you name it, actually, everything that enriches actually one's experience in life is lacking in all languages. And here we also count English, because this applies in a more international environment when meeting some for instance, children of expats and so on. And so this is an obstacle to social integration, obviously, feeling a little bit disconnected, not entirely understanding what's happening. We've got also what we call the live dictionary issue, you know, with other children asking to translate words just for fun, which is actually at one point a little bit of a weight. But probably more pressing issue is a question of identity, where this multiculturalism and multilingualism becomes a prime determinant when being introduced to a new social group. Basically, the children being introduced first of all as, oh, and now we've got Valeria, we've got Alexandra. Oh, do you know they speak several languages, which is important, but shouldn't be the prime determinant of who they are. So creating some situations like not wanting precisely to talk about it, some feeling of tiredness. We see that very clearly at the end of the week when the school days are gone, and the switching from one language to another feels a clear weight. Mutism, don't want to talk, and isolation. Here, on a more brighter sun, we've also kept a bit of a log of all those borrowings and word creations we've had, and mostly word creation, because while all the code switching and borrowing, well, you know what it is, usually just, you know, mixing words and having some meta linguistic issues. But here, a couple of examples that we thought could be useful for for the audience to keep in mind, and maybe some of you came across that. We've had one day, and we still laugh about that, une rasiette, which actually was a created word for a socket from razietka. We had the rashios, so we had a lot of words actually coming from Russian into French. Sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't work at all. So the rashios, which became an invented word for a hairbrush. We are regularly going to do the rhinok. We've had a karzin also at the rhinok precisely. So words that sounds almost French, could be French, but they're not. We've had then a mix between Czech, Russian, and French with alien, which can sound like a lièvre, which is a hare, but here the child meant actually a deer. We've had also sometimes issues with English, where we recrosse la rue, which is of course not exactly French. And then we've had some really twisted. It took us sometimes to really understand the origin of those created words. So in a Russian sentence, we've had smarkatki, meant for handkerchiefs, which is actually funny. And we've had also rasinka, meant from racine, which means roots. So here we go from mostly French and English, which are of course the parents' language, but we've had also in the case of Czech, and we couldn't of course log all the occurrences. That's cool, because well, that would be almost a different project. Here, two fun facts, because if there are difficulties, there are two examples that we thought actually are good, I would say, symbols of this complexity. The younger one stayed at a friend's for a sleepover, and actually we found out later on that she refused to eat some noodle soup. And we were very surprised because she actually likes very much soup and noodles, but we understood only later that noodle, which is the Czech word for noodle, is also a simple word, a colloquial manner to talk about the snot. So of course she didn't feel like trying a soup like that, which is very understandable. And then the next step came to really this metalinguistic awareness, where at one point all this handicap becomes actually matter for creation. And one day, so I don't know, you can speak some French, maybe some of you, I expect a bit in Canada, something. So the younger one also said, well, aujourd'hui j'ai mangé un gros chat, which literally means today I ate a big cat. And actually, she really meant grusha, but she made it on purpose. I mean, it was not a mistake this time. So it was the next level where we understood that, well, now we reach a level where this handicap of multilingualism can also be used among precisely people who've got the same possibilities. So the French sounded like a gros chat, when in reality we were talking about a pair. Right. So what about the conclusion of this study? So we came up with a number of issues, as I said, psychological, cognitive. We've had also communication and social. The main one is a delay in time to produce sentences, to produce words. And we don't have a lot of other cases to compare, because we know mostly bilingual, trilingual, not too many like us. But we've noticed, I would say, a further delay compared with the bilinguals. On the positive side, we've noticed also that still the common underlying proficiency came very much to a help at a certain age. And I would say after age of 9, already most of the difficulties that I've presented here became less, thanks precisely to the capacity to use what you learn in one language in the other language. And their level actually of linguistics, written and oral, is actually rather high now if we compare even with monolinguistics. But there was really a dip that we could feel between 0 and 8, 9. All right. And so all the literature that we came across that mostly deal with bilingualism was very useful. We didn't find any incoherences. And we could say that the work, the literature, and state of art in bilingualism can probably be applied with quadrilingualism without too many incoherences. This is all for now. What will be probably the follow-up studies in the next probably 5 years will be a cross-cultural analysis of the cross-cultural competence, capacity to precisely adapt to other culture, cultural identity, a big elephant in the room, and the feeling of belonging of the children, but that will probably be a topic of another further studies. Thank you very much. Questions,
Thank
please.
you very much, Jerome. That was very, very interesting. So shall we ask questions now or after the second presenter?
Better now, before we forget everything.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So let's then, so who would like to ask? Veronica already has a question for Jerome.
I don't even have a question. I want to thank Jerome for this very interesting presentation. And indeed, it appears that there seems to be universal rules of language transfer, right? For example, here the transfer is the biggest between Russian and French, which are the home languages, and it's natural because I would assume at home the influence of French and Russian is the strongest. So I also want to say that I hear your brother because my daughter was raised trilingual, and trilingual was a big challenge. So balancing four is incredibly hard. At least a good thing is that Czech is out of the way because you can completely ignore it. They will pick it up from their school. But managing three languages at home is particularly difficult too. So anyways, but the good news is that they develop, multilinguals tend to develop their own identities. For example, when asked, it's the same with my daughter and with some other multilingual kids, multi-ethnic identity roots too, they say, I am neither, like I am my own person.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, I'm the citizen of the world is an identity which is no worse than any other one. It just takes maturity, it takes social maturity, psychological maturity, and brain maturity. So after they get into their late 20s, it will be an excess, it will be an advantage rather than disadvantage. So you're saying that many studies focus on the advantages, it's true. So I like that your presentation is balanced. And indeed, I would like to see further continuation, and the good news for you that things indeed will be getting better, because by the age of more or less completion of language acquisition, 1920, they'll be happier with having multiple languages, multiple cultures, and multiple worldviews. Because it makes them 4 times smarter than an average kid, right?
Exactly.
Because they have 4 worldviews. When you're a small kid, are Russians bad or are Russians good? Of course, in Western context, is no-brainer, right? Because no matter whether you look from Czech perspective or French perspective, right? Any Western perspective, Russians are bad. So this can't be avoided. But if you keep like informing them of the good sides and the positive sides, and at least that there are multiple facets of truth, this will just make them go smarter and not liable to propaganda. So sometimes the lack of alternative truths, like here in rural Canada, its critical thinking becomes understood as following government ideology. So this hopefully will not be happening to your kids. So it just look, please, at the bright side, and then there will be more bright sides as the kids grow old.
Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. And anyone would like to ask a question to Jerome?
Yes, if I may.
Svetlana, please. Yes.
Yes, my name is Svetlana Malikin. I am from Boston University. And thank you very much for this illuminating talk. And it was very interesting to me, particularly because it just related to the talk I will be giving on Friday. So I do have a very practical question. So just practical for us researchers. When you did experiments, have you ever noticed that this kind of priming effects on the code switching in the participant group? So what I mean, so for example, if they were exposed to French or Czech media prior to the conversation, did they code switch more or less? And also any effects from the topic or domain of discussions, meaning do they use more French if they're talking about topics related to French culture, French language, or more Czech if they were talking about kind of non-French topics? So does that, can you comment on this?
Yes, so we covered a bit that in the paper more, of course. Here I had to really cherry pick. First of all, well, you've got a standard situation of who's present. We did not actually notice any specific pattern about the language they speak between themselves. And that may be the fact that there are more than 2, 3, in this case 4. They tend to speak mostly Russian, but actually it depends on the activity. Yes. For instance, a very practical example. Xbox at home is set up in French. Don't ask me why. Set up in French. Therefore, all the discussions that are actually linked, close or far, with games, computer, and so on, is in French, right? So it's more like some areas that are kind of labeled. So we have a few examples of the kind when we play also, depending on the game. They will switch the language based on the origin of the game, which is understandable because the vocabulary better applies. But so when we play a French card game, then the language is going to be French. When we play in Russian, a Russian card game, it's going to be in Russian. So I hope it answers your question, but that's as far as we got, yes.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, you did, you answer. And that's actually just very much linked to the idea of the identity. And so just, even though it's a big issue, so just it's an elephant in the room, as you mentioned, so it keeps our research, actually, for most of the case, not specifically linguistic problems. So
yes, the cultural aspect, we like to laugh about the fact that there is this famous term of third language, third culture kids.
Absolutely.
So we like to laugh that they are fourth culture kids, actually. But here, the age and maturity plays a big role. First, you need to acquire language so that you can express your ideas, and whatever you feel, this is a little bit too premature. Even with the older one, who's 14 now, honestly, it's very hard to talk about that.
Absolutely.
We need more interactions with different cultures, different people but that will come next.
But just it could be. It's just not that I recommend anything. So but in my case, it was really interesting to see the interactions in the real family gatherings, in the absolutely relaxed atmosphere, And in your case, so the kids' practices could probably, I don't know how to prove it, it's kind of like we can assume that they would mirror the practices of the adults. And that would be like a very
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably, but it's difficult because in the first place, also, we are immigrants, so it's again a different setup.
Very interesting. Yeah. So like a lot of it's kind of like a can of the just different kind of problems. Yeah. I got here. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Svetlana. Thank you, Jerome. Any other questions? So maybe if I may, I will ask one as well, Jerome. My first question you already answered is what is the language of the choice between the children? And apparently there isn't one. But my other question is, do you teach them to read and write in all four languages? Or
Yes,
what is your approach to this?
We do, not as much as we would like, and probably too much more than they want. So we do have, because Russian and French are not taught at all at school, of course, except with French now that the older one is taking in grammar school. The second language, because we third, if we learn German on top of that, it's going to be just too much of a mess. So yes, we've taught them to read, and that's where here precisely the CUP helps, so to read in Russian, to read in French. And one of the difficulties we found is to find material that is actually diverse enough to interest them, especially in Russian. In Russian, we've got all those classics, but it's difficult to find contemporary work that children that is 8 years old can actually relate to.
Mainly translated books.
Yeah, it's translated books and so on.
They read them in the original.
And we try to always stick to reading the original, of course. So in French, we got lots of literature precisely that can be found. In Russian, it's a bit more difficult. And we organize sometimes some dictants when the mood is there, try to make it as a challenge and so on. We play Scrabble, this type of stuff. And then after you got the question, of course, of the language that is being taught by the parents who's native and the language that is being taught by a teacher at school. And another fun fact is that, for instance, the youngest daughter didn't really understand that at school she was learning English. But actually she understands pretty much everything in English, but the way the teacher speaks with the accent, very basic English, and so on, she thought it was something else. And no, it's English too, and so on. So to answer your question, yes, we spend, and this is actually part also, not so much of the disadvantages, but of the weights of having a multilingual education, is that we are spending a lot of time dealing with that. Although it's not our job. It's not our job.
And yes, we're doing maths in Czech with the dictionary.
Yeah. And actually, schooling is a big issue, as I said, because helping kids in a language that is not your native language is one thing, but here it's the native language of nobody. And so we thought naively that actually history and mathematics would be easy topics. We thought, okay, history is history, math is math. And actually we found out that probably those two topics are the most culturally loaded topics, history for obvious reasons, but even actually science. And actually I was talking with a cousin of mine who's married to an American, and so had the same kind of discussions. And we found out, but that I keep it for the next paper precisely, that for instance, there's the way we are learning to make a division. Take a piece of paper and you divide a number by another number. The way we do it is different. So here it's beyond linguistics actually. So yes, it's a big. We spend lots of time on that.
It's fun.
And my last question: do you regret it?
Oh, no, well, first, we don't have much choice. So don't regret things you can't change. No, not really, no. For instance, we hesitated in having the children in some international schools. First of all, we don't necessarily like the population there. that's one thing. And all this super expat golden plated world. And even the French school, which has a good reputation, the problem is that they are not teaching the Czech language well enough. You know, it's really made for people who come and go. And we found that when you live in a country, you need to speak the language, at least you need to learn it properly. So no, we don't regret. Don't regret.
Okay, thank you very much, Jerome. Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting and engaging conversation. So shall we move on to the second presenter?